There's an opportunity open to every one of us every time we draw that so often just isn't recognised and therefore not taken advantage of. And it's really quite simple, and that's to not just use the one pen to do our whole drawing, but to consider the impact visually, the effect created, that using different pens, and by that, in this instance, I'm talking about pens of various widths. So we might start with a thicker one, move to one that's not as thick, and then perhaps move to a finer one, or even several finer ones, depending what our scene is and how we're visualizing our finished drawing looking. What effect we want the overall drawing to have. And the time to plan that is not once we've started drawing, but when we're looking at our reference and trying to work out what are the possibilities for this in my drawing. Because we always want to be doing more than just seeking to copy the reference. In this case, it's a section of Blenheim Palace in the UK. And so it's not just doing a line for line, because so often that's going to be impossible anyway, but we're going to create an effect that in some way we want to capture something of the essence of our subject, whatever made us want to draw it in the first place. Now, in this instance, I'm using a 0.3 uni pen at this point, and I'm decided I'm only going to use it for this framing of the lower half of this tower. It's just to give it a slightly heavier feel to how it looks. There's not a huge difference between the lines, I don't think, of 0.3 and 0.2, which I'm going to use then for most of the drawing. But I just wanted something a little bit subtle that just brought this lower central part towards us more, and I thought a slightly heavier line would do that. Now I'm also going to use the 0.3 for doing they're not really the divisions between blocks of stone, but it's a decorative render to make it look like division between blocks of stone. But I'm only going to use the 0.3 for the divisions on those two flanking sides that come out slightly. I'm going to use the 0.2 further in. Now, you might notice, as I'm about to notice, that my tower is going off on a lean to the left. This is something I do quite often when I draw, and it's because I'm not sitting straight onto the table where the drawing paper is squared off to the edge of the table, because of where the camera is in this instance. And so I'm sitting awkwardly, and that means that if you like a line perpendicular to my chest up against the table is actually going off to this same degree. In a moment, you'll see me actually straighten the paper, which means it's now straight to for the camera. The tower's going straight up, but of course the edge of the paper is no longer square to the table, and it's no longer square to my reference. I should have actually corrected the reference as well. Now, I did these figures with a 0.3 because they are the closest thing to us, so I do want them to have a stronger, more visually prominent feel. But I don't do the figure that's further away. I leave that until I've got, I'm not sure if it's the 0.2 or the 0.1, but we'll find out soon enough. You'll notice I just controlled where the arch intersection that we get from this viewpoint, which is in shade, I left off drawing it to leave room for me to establish the figure before I brought that down. And you're watching this at 3 times my real drawing speed, so if you reduce the video to half speed, it'll be almost real time for you to watch. So now I'm using my 0.2, and I'm doing these, if you like, detail lines in the central part of this tower base with a lighter feel. I'm not doubling up the lines, or not all of them anyway. Some of them are single, some of them are doubled. Again, trying to create a lighter feel so it just feels like it sits a little bit further back. these are the sorts of details, if we're going to draw them, we want to really do our best to get them symmetrical, get the angles looking right, because we're better off leaving them out if we can't draw them convincingly. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. There's nothing wrong with saying, well, I'm not in a place where I can do that detail yet confidently. But the way we get to that place is we do some practice drawings, practice exercises. I've just straightened it, or I'm straightening it now. And we just focus on doing those decorative elements. And we do them at a size that's large enough for us to feel comfortable with the line making, and large enough so that we're not getting caught up in things being too small and the problems that can cause. So now I'm just finishing these details. And if you're finding this interesting, please hit the like button for me. I haven't used these pens before. I've just started using them today. This is only the second drawing that I've made a video for that I've used them. So now I'm trying to work out this center section. And looking at this now, I can see, and I realized when I'd basically finished the drawing, that my part that I've drawn already isn't quite wide enough. The proportions are too tall and not wide enough in my drawing compared to the reference. It wasn't so obvious to me at this point, but this is why it's important to have a good look at our drawing at the end and pat ourselves on the back if we want, or for parts of it, but also to say what's not quite right, because it's in seeing what's not quite right that I get a focus of something. Well, I know I need to pay a little more attention to this and work out another way of doing this. And I didn't really get this across section well done. Instead of starting at the sides and working in, I should have started in the middle, because again, those two columns with the darkness between are not close enough together. I should have started by doing those and putting them close enough together, and then working outwards and positioning the sides of the arch section that holds the clock and supports the upper part of the tower. Now, arches such as this are always a bit of a challenge. They're made a little bit harder for me. I'm not making excuses, but the fact that I can't turn the paper so that the curves are always in my drawing sweet spot, as I call it. For me, that's the upper left quadrant of a circle. And normally I would turn my paper so that every quarter circle I had to draw was an upper left quadrant circle. But that is not so easily done when I've got the paper fixed in place for a video. So it pushes me to try and draw it as accurately as I can with the paper locked in place. Now, above the clock, this is a much shallower arc of a circle. It is, I think, part of a circle, but it's a much, much larger circle than the clock is. So just playing around a little bit, and where we have inaccuracies in our first take, where we have, as we do in this case, in effect heavier line or a double line at the top, we try now and compensate for any inaccuracy in our first line or lines to flatten a high point or to lift a low point, if you can see what I mean. If not, just go back and have a look at my first line and then how I massaged it, as I think of it, to try and bring it more into the correct shape. So now I just want to suggest this detail up here. And I want to make sure I don't go too high, too large with this detail. This is the sort of detail, and particularly at this point where there's nothing on a horizontal plane to reference, and there's quite a bit of small detail of things stacked on top of each other, it's easy for these to grow too large bit by bit, and then suddenly the whole tower is too high. So because I'm trying to draw this same size, I keep glancing left and right. My low adhesive tape came loose on the top, so I just put that back into place. Now, notice how I'm doing these symmetrical elements. I go from one side to the other and I do them at the same time. I do the same part of one on one side, then the other side, and I align them horizontally as I do this. I find this is far more accurate than, if you like, going up one side to the very top and then going up the other side. This way I get the focus on the horizontal alignment and keeping it tight, keeping it accurate. Probably did that top globe just a fraction too large, and I was trying to use my pen very lightly up the top. Now I had thought of going to the 0.05, which is actually the only, I don't have a 0.1, just remembering what I was doing. So I'm using a 0.3, a 0.2 and a 0.05. So I'm using half the width of a 0.1, and I'm only going to use that for what we see through the arch down the bottom, because that is right in the distance and I want that to feel quite some way away. So I'm using the 0.2 for the wing of the building to the left and for the chimney, but I'm particularly and very consciously holding it as lightly as I can and still get a reasonably even line, because I do want this to feel like it's set back behind the flanking squared pillars, if you like, of the lower half of this tower. And I don't want anything about those to grab too much attention. This is trying to keep what the main thing visually in our reference, keep that the main thing in my drawing. And the dominant thing is this tower and the heavier outlines, or the appearance of heavier outlines that the shadows cast because of where the light is and where we're viewing it from and the actual three-dimensional shape of it. So I think it's a great thing to work on to get the same effect, the same impression in our drawing that we have in the photo, and not to let the actual ink lines themselves become more visually dominant than the subject that they're drawing, that they're creating or we're hoping to create. So at this point now I'm getting the 0.05 and I use it just for a little bit of detail here where there is a very tiny round thing, probably a light of some sort. And now, still very lightly, I'm positioning the, well, what we can see of the far side of presumably what's a courtyard. I haven't been here, but these photos were very kindly given to me by a friend who was there to use in my videos. So, but still keeping a very light, almost a flicking movement of my pen. So 3 pens and a subtle difference between the 0.3 and the 0.2, and a stronger difference between those and the 0.05. But as I said, when we're first looking at our photo and trying to work out how is my drawing going to look, consider using different thicknesses of pen. And so when we buy pens, it's worth buying 2 or 3 or 4 of a range of widths of the same brand. We're just about done. It doesn't work as well swapping brands. The inks can be different colours and they just can handle different and dispense their ink in different ways, which means the differences are not as easy to control. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. Well, what did you think? If you'd like to have a go of this with 3 different pens or just 1 pen or with anything, you'll find the reference on my channel community page. But whatever you draw, however you draw it, and however many pens you use, make sure you have fun. I'll see you next time. Bye.